in the church and around music and being like kind of pushed into that. Not pushed into it, but like it was my environment. So I began to watch my dad as he led worship, watch my dad as he practiced his instrument, and now I play piano exactly like he does. It's just how I picked it up. I watched something and I replicated it. But I was called into worship ministry very young when I was still in youth group, and that calling looked a little different than what most other callings look like, and it was the youth pastor saying, "Hey, you're going to lead worship now." So, Chance, you sure you want this? All right. All right, cool. But from there, from the Carpenter's house, I moved actually back to Saline First Assembly of God as the youth pastor there for a short time. It was a little stepping stone into what I am now doing with the youth here at Belleville Church of God, working with the youth here and helping out wherever I can, right? Yeah, so that's me. I'm Andrew. I play guitar. I play a little bit of piano. And worship is my passion. Worship was my first love in ministry and probably will continue to be one of my number one loves in ministry, and that's the worship ministry. But tonight, I kind of prepared, where do I start? If you know anything about music, and I don't expect everyone to, but throughout a song, there's something called a chord progression. And that's the movement of one chord from another, or one note to another. So when we talk about worship in the church, it usually reflects through the music, the worship service. So today I kind of prepared a worship progression of how worship, in my eyes, progresses to the point where we experience the presence of God, right? 9, 6:12, and 6:13. So while reading this to myself, I thought that if God's saying it more than once, it's probably important, right? So I'm actually going to read verses 9, 12. "There shall be kept burning on it. It shall not go out." And on 13, it says, "The fire shall be kept burning on the altar continually. It shall not go out." Now, like I said, if I know anything about God, and I don't know much, I still got a lot to learn. It's if God's saying something more than once, you should probably pay attention. And we should probably keep the fire on the altar burning and don't let it go out, right? But we can view these things today. We can kind of correlate those things in the Old Testament to new things here, and we can do this as such. The altar, we can say, is our heart, okay? The fire is our relationship with God. And the sacrifice on the altar is our sacrifice of praise. Make sense? The priests were called to keep the fire burning and never let it die out. We are called to keep our relationship with God burning in anticipation for our sacrifice of worship. But how do we do that? It's a great question, Mason. I appreciate it. It's simple: continuing to worship in our lives. So you hear this big cliche that, like, worship is a lifestyle. Like, you hear that. Cliches are cliches for a reason. And by this time, you're probably ankle deep in that water, okay? You've experienced something. You've experienced that water on your feet. You just dipped your toes in. However, what the church does is when that Sunday's done, they don't continue from that point. What happens is next Sunday, they've regressed, and now they're back on the shore. And now what do they got to do? They got to take a step, take a couple more steps, and by the end of the service, they're only ankle deep. What we should be doing, and what at that point when I opened the door and saw carpet was torn up, my worship journey stopped. It was over for the week. It happens. It happens. It happens. Your worship journey gets cut short from what it should be. But we got to make an effort throughout the week to continue the worship, even though it's stopped. You got to make the effort to get back to where you were and go even further, right? I talked about that. I jumped around in my notes too much. And I can't even turn the page. So, it's that kind of anticipation, that kind of preparation that pastor does that keeps him from starting back on the shore when Sunday morning comes around. It's that kind of anticipation that causes the next A to change. And the next A, when you're watching a movie, you can match the light to the lighting of the movie. It gets you in it. It's pretty fun. You might turn on some music. If you want a chill, relaxing night, you might turn on some jazz music. Some nice, soft worship music. You don't like jazz? That's fine. But if you're throwing a party, you might throw on some dance music, right? I don't dance, so I probably wouldn't do that. But you're going to throw on music for whatever the mood calls for. If you want an exciting mood, you're probably going to throw on some exciting music. And you might even light some candles, right? Make it smell good. We have too many candles. Lost it. Restaurants make a big deal about the tone and the environment that is present within the restaurant because they want to make the customers or the patrons feel welcome, feel comfortable. Restaurants try to create atmospheres that are conducive to having a pleasant experience. We should be similar in that we should create an atmosphere, our worship should create an atmosphere conducive to the presence of God, right? Conducive to the Holy Spirit. And that's what happens when we instill the next A concept. See, it's a chord progression that moves from one thing to another, to another, to the next. Authentic. Third A is authentic. We must be authentic when it comes to our worship and our praise. Do our motives match our motions? That's the big question we can ask ourselves when it comes to our worship lifestyle. Spirits, their true selves. Now, our worship must come from a place that is wholeheartedly ourselves and a place that has no shame. That's how we are authentic. When we come from a place that has no shame. That's truly ourselves. Now, sometimes the things that God has pulled us through are reflected in our authentic worship. That makes sense? Some of the most beautiful worship comes from those who have the most troubled past. I know a gentleman who grew up in the bad part of town. He was involved in gang stuff when we have to get out of the way in our worship. This kind of ties in with being authentic when it comes to abandon, but we have to be able to put ourselves to the side and make room for what God is doing and let Him do His thing. Being a bigger guy like me, I experience this more often than not. If there's not room for me, I ain't doing it. If there's not room, I ain't doing it. You bet I've passed up elevators that probably I could have gotten in, but nope, I won't be able to move. I'm just gonna pass. You guys can go ahead. I don't like big crowds because I can't move freely. I use my arms a lot. Tehillah means to sing unrehearsed. Tauda means to extend or raise your hands in thanksgiving for something that hasn't happened yet. Yada means to extend your hands vigorously in complete surrender atmosphere. We must worship with our true selves and make sure our motives match our motions. Authentic. We must be willing to step out of the way and let God do what He wants to do in our lives and in the church and in other people. That's the abandon. And that is the worship progression.
Something that when it's offered, it may be a well-rehearsed reproduction of what used to be. There used to be a fire there, but the fire is gone. But I don't want anybody else to know that the fire is So is it live or is it Memorex? Is it the real thing? Or am I just still doing the motions outside of the church? When you're not at a piano, when you're not on guitar, and there's a group of people that you're looking at, when it's just you and Jesus.
Hmm.
Can you speak just for a moment about an experience like that in your life? What it was like? Because I think sometimes in our minds we get caught up with here. But what's it like, just you and Jesus?
Hmm.
Is there a difference? Does it feel anything like that?
Yeah, I think it's similar. Obviously, worship is in my head anything that you can do that glorifies God, and we can glorify God through music. We can glorify Him through prayer, which is a big one for me.
They got these pastors out here that do it all, right? They preach, they sing, they play the piano, they look good, they're talented, they're rich, they got it all, right? I'm like,
You got all that, just not the voice.
no, I got the voice. Stairs, said a prayer, got back upstairs, didn't miss a play. I mean, it was boom, baby, like that. It was awesome. And I was watching the. Are you trying to sing it?
Spirit move with